Now, we have a wonderful tradition here at LongHouse of having all sorts of artists. So we did not dream up just to go along with these talks and with Toni's beautiful installation. But on the grounds right now, we have 5 women artists. And
no, you've got 2 curators.
no, not on the panel today. No, I'm talking about LongHouse. And I'm talking about on the LongHouse grounds right now. We have, aside from Toni, we have Linda Benglis, we have Marilyn Dinton-Fass, we have Mario Yagi, anyway. And we have a great tradition. Yoko Ono, Linda Benglis, Kiki Smith. We have a great tradition of showing women artists at LongHouse. So I think this is particularly appropriate to have these panels here. And we are thrilled with everyone who's arrived, and we are thrilled with this panel, and we mostly are thrilled that Toni chose this site and was able to make this great installation, unlike anything we have ever had here before. So, hooray for her, and thank you all for coming.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Diane. This is fantastic. I'm so excited to see everybody here. And so just one piece of housekeeping, cell phones. So let's say you think you turned it off. Could you just check? That would be like really great, because I actually just ran to turn mine off. So I want to thank everybody for being here. It's such a beautiful day. I know you could be elsewhere, but this is such an extraordinary panel. I'm really excited to hear everybody. I just wanted to take a quick minute to thank our underwriters who, without them, this definitely could not have happened. Alpine Bank, the Abudi and Hoffman families, Dorothy Lichtenstein, Sherry Sandler, who is here today, Nada Young, and IET, Integrated Exercise Therapy, which if you don't know about, it's in Bridgehampton. They're fantastic. Also, Sandy and Stephen Perlbinder and the Rico Maresca Gallery, who helped to underwrite the installation. Barbara Rose, Terrie Sultan, Andrea Grover, Michelle Stuart, and Alice Aycock. Each one of these panelists has inspired me in one way or another. I love their work, and they have really either led a path, broken a glass ceiling, inspired, instructed, and I'm incredibly honored to be here with all of you today, and I really look forward to the conversation. I just want to welcome you also to my installation, Sanctuary Entwined, which I had no idea how people would interact with the piece, not having done this specific work before. But it seems to be both kind of a gathering place and a meditative space, and I'm really happy about that. So I invite you all to come back alone and be with the work. It's really, and you can go inside these two, obviously not this one, but I invite you to do that. I'd like to especially thank Jack Leonard Larson and Peter Olson, who could not be here today. They're upstate, but I thank Jack for inviting me to do this. Matko Tomicic.
Thank you so much, Toni. So Toni and I actually worked on a piece last summer as part of the Parish Roadshow, and it was an installation not unlike this one, although this one is definitely a grander scale. That was at Martyrs in Bridgehampton, and she made use of these enormous boulders that the Martyrs family had moved to the site from Springs, and built around the boulders, kind of engulfing them, these hay bale cubes that were also a structural challenge. And I feel like, hopefully, Toni feels this way, that this work kind of grew out of that first experimentation. So I encourage you all to go inside and around these works after the panel if you haven't already. So this is a formidable group of women up here that I'm with, in the middle of. Yes, my name is Andrea Grover, and I am the executive director of Guildhall. Hello. So I've been moderating a few panels lately, and what I find is always problematic is when the moderator has a handful of questions that really never tap the collective intelligence of the panel, and there's a lot on this panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the credentials, the CV, the resume of each person, and then I'm going to have them tell us what isn't written. So the narrative part of their career and their professional trajectories, or I should say vocations. So for those of you who don't like fine print, this is a public service announcement. I'm going to read the bio that's in your program. We're going to start with Alice Aycock, just because it starts with A. Alice Aycock's works can be found in numerous collections, including the MoMA, the Whitney, Louis Vuitton Foundation, Storm King Art Center, and Sprengel Museum in Hanover, Germany. A traveling retrospective was organized by the Kunsthalle in Stuttgart. Thank you for letting me say that instead of what's written here. It's hard to pronounce. And a retrospective was held at Storm King in 1990. In 2013, a retrospective of her drawings and small sculptures was exhibited at the Parrish Art Museum in Watermill. I was very happy to be at the Parrish at that time. And that coincided with the Gray Art Gallery in New York City. She has major large-scale works throughout the country, including JFK Airport, San Francisco Public Library, 60th Street, East River, the waterfront in Nashville, Tennessee, and Dulles International Airport. Recent major permanent installations include Coral Gables, Florida, and MGM National Harbor, Maryland. A series of sculptures were installed on Park Avenue entitled Park Avenue Paper Chase in 2014, and she will have an artist exhibition at Marlborough Gallery, 57th Street, opening in October. So, Alice, tell us what's not written in that biography.
So I have to go. Can you hear? Is this turned on or not?
Flip the switch.
Is it turned on? Okay.
Or you want to use this a little better?
Yeah. I think it is a little bit better. Okay. Well, I guess we have to sum up in 5 to 8 minutes our entire life, which is not so easy to do. So to cut to the chase, I grew up in a little town in Pennsylvania. My parents were New York-centric, so I came to New York very frequently from the time I was 6. The moment I got there at 6, I said, this is the city I wish I was born in, and this is the city I want to live in. So as soon as I could, I went to college at Rutgers, Douglas College, Rutgers University, and I studied with some phenomenal teachers. Most of them were Fluxus artists. We were not taught craft. We were taught to think. And I had been a kind of closet artist. I was very academically oriented. And I basically gave in when I was at Douglas in my second year, sophomore year, to art. But I gave in because it was taught within the context of liberal arts. And so I had a very good foundation in history, biology, sociology, English, all of those things. And it was only when I saw art within that kind of context that I allowed myself to become an artist. And I still believe very strongly that art should be the center of many different discourses, and that while absolutely composition, which I believe in, and craft, and all of that is extremely important, that it should resonate in a much more deeper, complex way, which is the challenge I give myself. My work appears to have changed over the years, but in fact, I think it's really the same story. I just come at it a different way. And what else do I want to say? I've always needed assistance. When I was young, my father started a construction company, and I grew as that company grew. He was a bridge builder and he installed large installations all over the Northeast. And therefore, it was very normal for me to think of using cranes and assistants and bulldozers and all of those kinds of things in my work. I always have to say that because people ask why, and that is why it was normal for me. And at this point, I've always had a team of really excellent, devoted, fantastic people. They change over the years, but they have been absolutely fundamental to how I work. And at the moment, I have a team in Fort Lauderdale of about 12 or 15 people who fabricate. The studio in New York designs. We design sort of like an architect. We have engineers we use. I stay very close to everything I do. We're designing on the computer, and I then follow everything, and I'm sort of like the boss lady, I suppose. But for some reason, everybody puts up with me until I burn them out, and then we get a new team. Again, I'm really comfortable when I walk onto a construction site. I feel at home because I guess it was just something that I was used to. So I think that pretty much sums it up, I hope, in 5 to 8 minutes. Oh, I have a few minutes left. Oh, what am I going to talk about? Oh, wow. No, that'll get me in trouble, I'm afraid. Anything else I might say? Well, what I would say is this. In preparation for this panel, which I was, usually I've got a bunch of slides and images behind me, and I can speak to that. I read little Emily Dickinson in one of her poems about the brain being wider than the sky. And I also reread an editorial by Charles Blow, who writes for the Times, and he wrote this in 2013, and he said, "I choose to achieve as an act of defiance." And that is something I tell my students, regardless of who they are, where they come from, that you define yourself. You do not let others define you, and you choose to achieve as an act of defiance against everything that might stand in your way. So that's it. Thank you.
That's an incredible statement. Thank you so much, Alice. So in keeping with not keeping in order and being defiant, we're not going to go alphabetically. We're going to skip ahead to Terrie Sultan. I hear a cell phone. Terrie Sultan was appointed director of the Parish Art Museum in January 2008. She has more than 30 years of experience as a museum professional, having served in senior positions at the New Museum of Contemporary Art in New York, the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, and the Blaffer Art Museum at the University of Houston. She has organized more than 45 exhibitions in her career, including Andreas Gursky, Landscapes, Chantal Ackerman, Moving Through Time and Space, Jessica Stockholder, Kissing the Wall, and Chuck Close Prints, Process and Collaboration. An accomplished author, her most recent book is From Lens to Eye to Hand, Photorealism from 1969 to Today, which coincides with the exhibition that's currently at the Parish. Sultan is a member of the International Association of Art Critics, the Contemporary Art Museum Directors Forum, and the Association of Art Museum Directors. She oversaw the design and construction of the parish's new 34,000 square foot building designed by renowned architects Herzog and de Meuron, which opened in November 2012. I was there for it. Terrie, so tell us a little bit about your trajectory.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Well, before I start, I think Andrea and I would both just like to ask everybody to just say a silent prayer for our museum and artist colleagues in Houston, Texas, who are getting ready to have a very unpleasant experience, which Andrea and I have experienced ourselves many times over the time that we lived in Houston at the same time. So just think about them and how they're trying to protect their own application and their spaces. I was born in Asheville, North Carolina. My father was an amateur artist. My mother was an amateur actress. I thought I was going to be an artist my entire life because I saw my dad making I went to the College of Visual and Performing Arts, and we were actually taught craft and not how to think. Consequently, I was a really great art student, but by the time I finished 4 years of a very rigorous craft-oriented program, I had no idea what to make when I got out of school and didn't have anybody to give me an assignment, and realized that I probably wasn't the kind of person that was going to be in a studio by myself trying to make something. And so I embarked on a kind of a college or university of life at that point. I was only 20 years old when I got out of school. I worked for the Opera Company of Boston. I spent 2 years in Apia, Western Samoa in the Peace Corps. I came back and worked in an advertising agency and an architecture firm before I finally figured out that I needed a real avocation and profession, not something that I did during the day to try to do something else at night. And that's when I went back to school and got my degree in museum studies with a minor in art history, and did my very first museum experience at the Oakland Museum in California, where I worked part-time as a curatorial assistant, as an intern, and part-time in the communications department. And that actually, in those days, having an internship generally often turned into a job, which is what happened, and that sort of set me on the road to where I am today. I also met my husband in California, and that was 32 years ago. And I will say that being a curator married to an artist is a really good combination, because insights come from various different ways, and having somebody who still is sitting in a studio all by himself making something out of nothing actually helps you when you are trying to talk to other people that do the same thing. Alice's quote from Charles Blow is very inspiring. I would say if I had a quote of my own that is more or less the guiding principle of how I've tackled my challenges as a professional, is never let a crisis go to waste, because it's an opportunity to do things that you probably wouldn't have done otherwise. I was at the Corcoran Gallery of Art when our director canceled the Robert Mapplethorpe show. I ended up being just about the only curatorial employee at the Corcoran Gallery of Art for several years, and managed to make that crisis work in a way. Coming to the parish in 2008 and witnessing the collapse of the world economy could have also had a very negative outcome, but in fact it gave us an opportunity to rethink our approach to the building, and manage to get something that I hope has been a real impact to our community. And we're 5 years old this year, and looking forward to what's going to happen to us the next 5 years. So I think that's my 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Terrie. Okay, we're going to go to Michelle Stuart. We are, Michelle, coming to you. I am so impressed with this panel. I'm almost dumbstruck. Since the 1960s, Stuart has created a multifaceted body of work, including large-scale earthworks, complex multimedia installations, earth drawings, encaustic paintings, sculptural objects, drawings, and prints. The photographic image has been an ancillary part of her work in the past. It is currently her primary medium. Her work references a range of influences from history, astronomy, botany, and her extensive travels to ancient archaeological sites. Stuart has exhibited widely, most recently and currently at the 2017 Venice Biennale and Dia Beacon, New York. Her work can be found in museum collections including the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Museum of Contemporary Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Walker Art Center, and Los Angeles County Museum of Art. So Michelle, tell us how you got here, not just today.
I have a voice that sometimes gives out, so I will make an effort. How I got here, I was conceived in Sydney and born in Los Angeles. I always wanted to be an artist. From the time I was 5, my mother took a drawing of mine and tacked it to the wall. Voila. So, I mean, there were a lot of other things I was interested in as I was growing up. One of them being, of course, nature. And so I spent a lot of time traveling around California and kind of enthralling myself with nature. And I wasn't very good about time either. And so time has always interested me because I couldn't tell time. I was dreadfully bad at math. It took me years. That and being able to tell reality, that was another problem. But I did take art all through school, and I took some classes in high school, outside of high school, with some contemporary artists that were really, really, they were very important to me. And I say this because I think that art school is art school, and art in universities is a similar thing. But to a lot of these artists were kind of immigrants from Europe. I had a lot of training with immigrants from Europe. And one of them was a Hungarian artist named Dierderly, who was taught classical drawing. So he brought in voluptuous models and really taught us in a classical style what to look for. And I think it was one of the most important things that I ever did. You can't hear me? Can you hear me? Good. All right. And then I got very interested in archaeology and mural painting. We had some very interesting murals in California, like Detroit and a few other places. We did not cover them over. And I saw a lot of them as I was hunting around for images. We had a very poor museum when I was growing up. It's a great museum now. And so I got on a bus and I went to Mexico, and I went to some archaeological sites all on my own. It was not that difficult. And I got a job with Diego Rivera, which also strangely wasn't that difficult. I just said, I'm here, I'm willing to help. And that was a crucial experience. I met a lot of other artists through that. Any closer and I can't talk. So I spent about a year working in Mexico, painting, and then I went to Europe for 3 years and lived in Paris and traveled around Europe, which was also very important in my trajectory, I think. And but I always yearned for New York, and so I came back to the United States in the late 50s and started working and experienced the abstract expressionists. That was completely what was the main art form right then. It was very, very important, and quite exciting. But it wasn't my my heart was not in abstract expressionism. So I did plaster sculpture. It was always an objet. I liked working with my hands. And so I made a lot of plaster sculpture. I made a lot of boxes with plaster sculpture. And it was almost like working with ceramics, which I always loved. And then what happened? I experienced the 60s. Wonderful experience. But it was extremely difficult for a woman artist at that moment. I mean, it always is, but it was particularly difficult because there was a kind of a transition going on between art being made not for money and then art being made for money. And I think it was fine until money entered the picture, and then it became a lot more difficult. And I would say the next trajectory was the 70s, which is maybe my favorite decade because it was extremely exciting in New York City. A lot of people working in very different ways, and I started working from the late 60s with earth and started making large pieces incorporating earth and paper. And then I did a very large piece at Art Park in 1975 and started having shows. And so from there, I did everything. I did work, a lot of drawing. I made drawing my main focus for some years. And then I started painting and doing sculpture again. I did a lot of sculptural objects. And all along I was documenting with photographs from almost the very beginning. And as time went by, the photographic image became more important to me as a kind of mysterious thing. I did study photography with Harold Feinstein, and he was great, but he said I'm a Zen street photographer, which meant I didn't learn anything practical about the camera whatsoever, but I could go out in the street and take photographs. So he was kind of wonderful. And so slowly, I think all of these things became one. I mean, I think that's how I prefer to work. Some artists prefer other ways of working. I prefer working alone. I really don't like anybody around. I don't mind having somebody do archival work in my studio, but I do all my own stuff, you know. And I find that that's the way I can look at the world, is getting into my own either mistakes or non-mistakes, and somebody likes mistakes. It's just, you know, it's a mode. You know, so I don't know anything else.
Thank you, Michelle. So we're now going to hear about Barbara Rose. Barbara Rose is an art historian, critic, curator, and documentary filmmaker who lives in Rhinebeck, New York, and Madrid, Spain. She attended Smith College, the Sorbonne, and received her PhD from Columbia University. She was an art critic of the Partisan Review, contributing editor to Art International, Arts Magazine, Art in America, Art Forum, and New York Magazine. Subsequently, she was editor-in-chief of the Journal of Art, twice winner of the College Art Association of America Award for Distinguished Art Criticism. She has written monographs on, among others, Helen Frankenthaler, Magdalena Abakanowicz, and Emily Bene Brzezinski. She curated the Lee Krasner retrospective at MoMA and Lee Krasner at Jackson Pollock, A Working Relationship at Guildhall. She is currently working on a book on the Mos Arabic Beatus manuscripts. Her latest exhibition, Painting After Postmodernism, Belgium, USA, was seen in Brussels, Belgium, Malaga, Spain, and in Puebla, Mexico, before traveling to the Regia di Caserta in Naples, Italy, next spring. Now, Barbara Rose.
Well, the first question I ask myself is, what am I doing here? And because basically I don't want to go anywhere. I just sit around in my little house in Rhinebeck and write, or in my house in Madrid. But I looked at the other people who were on the panel, and I thought, these are people that I really respect, and two of whom I know. So it was basically because I like the other people on the panel that I came, and I like Michelle's work, which I have followed over the years. And the other reason is I have not been in the Hamptons in many, many years, but I used to spend my summers here with Lee Krasner in the Krasner Pollock house, and I used to stay in the bedroom that had been Pollock's studio before he moved to the barn. So I want to go tomorrow and look at it again. I haven't seen it in many, many years. And Lee was an incredible influence on my life. I admired her tremendously. I met her at a very bad time in her life when people were referring to her as the widow Pollock. Her work wasn't taken seriously. I lived through a lot with Lee, and the fact that finally I was able to do her retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art, which was the first retrospective of a woman artist at the Museum of Modern Art, I feel was one of the accomplishments of my life. I made a movie about Lee, which won a lot of prizes, and I'm sorry we can't see it because I think it really gives you the full Lee, which is quite an experience. And so I thought, well, what do these women have in common? I mean, I like them, and why? And it's about survival. It's about the fact that none of us have had a very easy time. But somehow or another, we sort of muddled through and survived, and as Terrie said, turned a crisis into an opportunity. And it's the ability to do that, I think, that in the long run is what counts. Because everybody comes up against whatever it is that life dishes out to you. And the question is, how do you deal with it? And I think you try to do it with dignity, and you try to survive, and you try to remain yourself, which is very difficult, and not compromise. And I admire all these women, I have to tell you, because they never compromised. And that is really, really a tough thing to do in this world. I think what Terrie's done with the Parish Museum is nothing short of a miracle. And I wanted to congratulate her. It's fantastic. It's really wonderful, and it's wonderful for this community, and it wasn't easy. And nothing I think that any of us has done was easy. We didn't take the easy way. I saw Alice's work. I had a magazine, the Journal of Art, and Terrie's husband, Christopher French, was one of my principal editors and principal writers, because he's a great writer as well as an artist. And we published an article, and I think it was the first big article. I didn't write it, but I published it on Alice's work. And so I got to know it at that point. And then I saw it again in Italy, in a place called the Fattoria di Celle. And which is a fantastic place. It's actually, this is a little bit like it, but this is more manicured. It's a natural park, which Giuliano Gordi has made into the most fantastic foundation. He took his children together and he said, well, look, this is it. You're not getting anything. Everything stays in the ground, on the walls. That's it. Are you okay with that? And they said, yeah. So you can go there. If you ever go to Italy, it's outside of Florence. And Alice has a huge piece there. And again, it's remarkable for its construction and the engineering and all of that. And it is, a world in which women artists, ambitious women artists, had to compete, but on a different level. Lee told me the story about, she'd been a Hoffman student, and Hoffman came around and he said, this is so good, you would think it was done by a man. And that's what it was at that time. Now, without Lee Krasner, there is no Jackson Pollock. There is also no Clement Greenberg, because he didn't know, he was a very bad artist, a very bad landscape painter, and Lee dragged him to the Hoffman lectures, and so he learned about Matisse and he learned about modern art. But she had, as a Hoffman student, was at the very frontier of modern art, and she had these terrible jobs, and then on top of it, then she had to take care of Jackson Pollock. And she taught him about modern art, because he had been trained by Thomas Hart Benton. And as I'm listening to these stories, I realized that we were really very much formed by our teachers and by our educations. There are certain things I can do and certain things I can't do because of my education. because I was trained by a bunch of Germans. They were the refugee scholars who had gone to Columbia and the Institute of Fine Arts, and by Meyer Shapiro. And it was all about perfection and footnotes and, being an art historian. It's 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that is constraining to me. There's a certain kind of freedom that I really don't have. In fact, I'd done a tape with Jasper Johns, and I sent him the transcript, and he said, "You made all that up." And I said, "No, I don't have the imagination." I said, "I have the mind of an archivist. I don't make stuff up. I need a document." We are really creatures of our formation and also of our families and our family structures. I was the oldest child, and I had brothers, and then I had 3 male first cousins. But I was the quarterback on our touch football team. And my idea of what guys did was what I told them to do. I never had another idea than that. I thought this is the way it is. They do what I told them to do. So Lucy Lepard, who went to the same college that I went to, and who was a great human being, great critic, great, fantastic everything. And she said, "Well, you'll see, you're going to fall for feminism." I said, "No, I'm not." She said, "You'll see, when you fall, you'll fall hard." I said, "It's never going to happen." And it never did. But what did happen was I began to realize that the interesting, powerful, energetic art was coming from women. And I noticed that. And I thought, this is important to realize that. And then I realized also, somebody said to me, the worst thing, a very beautiful English artist named, her last name is Murdoch. She's a conceptual artist. Anyway, she's very good looking. And she said, women don't help good looking women. And I said, well, no, that's not true. And she said, no, women really have to help women. And I thought, Sadie Murdoch is her name. And I said, well, maybe you're right. And I thought, I never thought about it. I mean, it just wasn't an idea in my mind. And I thought, I think that's true. And I think that women do have to help other women. Because even though now, the playing field is more level, you have a different set of problems. And Freud is right. Anatomy is destiny. I mean, either you have children or you don't have children. But one or the other is affecting your life in some way. And you have all this other, internal garbage that's going on all the time that you have to deal with that men don't have to deal with. And you have to be stronger. And I used to spend a month in the winter with George O'Keeffe in Abiquiu. Because I wrote a book, and she wrote me, and she said, "I hate what everybody writes about me, but I like what you write. Would you like to come to Abiquiu?" I said, "When's the next plane?" But the next plane went to Albuquerque. But anyway, I ended up staying with her for a month every winter, and she gave me a book by Ashley Montague called The Natural Superiority of Women. And I thought, yeah, I think that's true. I think women are naturally superior. I just do think so. And unfortunately, my poor brothers do too. Anyway, but I think this park is delightful. I think and I think also, I was talking to Toni, I think it's wonderful a community of artists are supporting each other out here, because Manhattan is really impossible. I mean, I hate it. I never wanted to go to New York. I just went there to school, and then I kind of got trapped, whatever, for a while. But I ended up in Europe and in the country, which I prefer. But I think everything depends on community today. Everything. If anybody's going to survive in this country, they're going to survive through community. And so I applaud the efforts of everybody here who are trying to build this community. And I think it's terribly important.
Thank you. I'm glad we ended with you. That's a nice summation. So I want the panelists to talk to each other now at this point, but I want to return to a quote that Alice started us with, which was the Charles Blow quote, "I choose to achieve as an act of defiance." So I'd like any one of you to tell me how acts of defiance have helped you in terms of sustaining your work, the work that you do.
Well, I think sometimes the strongest act of defiance is just turning up every day, even if it seems hopeless, or your challenges are too great, or you're not getting the support you need, or people didn't turn out to be the way you thought they were going to, or any number of things that can happen. So that is the way you achieve, actually, is simply by turning up. And I mean, Woody Allen said it, 90% of success in life is just turning up. And Chuck Close told me that the reason that he makes the work the way he does as an artist is because he knows what he's going to do every day. He comes to the studio, he starts in the upper left-hand corner of the painting, and he works his way down to the lower right-hand corner, and then he turns around and does it again the next day, and the next day, and the next day after that. And at the end of the day, he ends up with something that's a rather extraordinary achievement. And so I think that it's probably true, and I'd love to hear from, it's interesting also that the curators are on one side of this equation and the artists are on the other. That was definitely not done on purpose. There is this notion that, in order to achieve, you have to be defiant, and the way that you're defiant is like just don't letting those other challenges stop you from turning up every day.
Well, I actually printed the entire editorial. What Charles Blow goes on to say, he talks about a lot of things like luck and where you're born and fate and all of that. But what he talks about is climbing the hill, and that, or the Arabian Nights, or Camille, or the picture of Dorian Gray. And I read maybe 15 or 20, and then I went and bought my own 50. But what he was really saying to me was, you may not be able to do everything physically in the world because of all kinds of things, but you can dream and think yourself into a multitude of possibilities and places and people's lives, and that is, and I challenge you to do that. So every night at the dinner table, I would challenge him. Did you read that book? I did. And so I think also a kind of healthy competition that could go on, even as a young child, is really important. And you learn to also, at least I did, internalize that competition. And so for me, it's not just about whether I'm recognized in the world, which of course I love, but am I really living up to my expectations about what I need to do next? And I would also say, as an artist, and I have to cop to this, it's my addiction. I can't help it. I wish I could. I wish that I could, say, okay, enough's enough. But it torments me. And there is a phrase from Tom Waits, a song he sings, I call it Waltzing Matilda, where he's out there and he says, hey buddy, will you just give me will you give me a couple bucks so I could try this one more time? And I think that for me, that song is kind of my emblem. Like, it's like, okay, I did this, but you know what, that wasn't really it yet. I want, can I ask you, could you just give me another shot at this? Give me a little bit more money to try this other thing. And so if that's defiance, then I cop to that. But, so that's it.
I don't feel defiant, actually. So that word kind of hit me, and I think it's totally fine that people feel that way, but I don't think I've ever felt defiant. I feel like I wonder more about understanding what connections things in the world have, and that brings me a lot of pleasure, actually. And the relationships between the pattern of a leaf and a petroglyph. Somebody who actually was trying to understand a bison or trying to understand what the sun was. And I think we're the same people as those people. And we're looking at nature in the same awestruck way. I mean, we just had the eclipse. The eclipse was amazing. Can you hear back there? No. Okay, got it. you cannot hear me, I'm sorry.
No, actually, okay. So Michelle was just talking about the eclipse and that what say, early Homo sapiens were thinking about and looking at nature may have very much been the same as us, as evidenced through the eclipse. I'm going to give a little plug for a book called Sapiens by Yuval Harari. Have people read this book? It's a fascinating look at the evolution of Homo sapiens. He calls it a brief history of humankind. But Yuval Harari manages to connect many different branches of knowledge, sometimes in a single page. But he says that we didn't evolve through a prolonged period of time, that we had a cognitive mutation that suddenly made us able to use and make tools, and that catapulted us to the top of the food chain. So while other predators might have developed great eyesight and strength and agility, we were still very physically vulnerable, but yet at the very top, and that the lingering part of that vulnerability, the memory of what it means to be prey, stays with us. And so that's what makes us such complex beings, is that there's an intelligence but a vulnerability that's simultaneous, which
curiosity is probably the greatest aspect of our character. Is the curiosity is what really drives us, and to see things, to understand other worlds, other things in nature, and own them in a sense by drawing them or converting them to some other mystery, from one mystery to another. I think that that's the incredible thing about art, is that the fact that we're doing this sends us down a road to enlightenment, in a sense, not in the religious sense, but I sometimes finish something and I look at it and I don't understand it at all, and I don't know where it came from, but there it is, and I'm very happy when that happens, because it's a totally unplanned event, Maybe me, maybe part of me, maybe, something that just kind of slipped in the door when I wasn't looking. So, yeah, I think if my curiosity ended, I'd be dead. It's just something that you have to have and put to use, too. Yeah.
Well, I agree with that. I think some would argue that curiosity is what leads to long life, to longevity, right? Because you're keeping different pathways active in the mind. Did either of you want to add to this? No. Or I can ask another question.
No, I think I never felt defiant. I just felt that I didn't have any choice. And I think, when we were speaking at first and you said, well, here are your careers, and there were these CVs, I said, no. I said, I don't think any of us have a career. We have a vocation. We can't do anything except what we do. I couldn't do anything except what I do. I know Terrie couldn't either, and I know the artists couldn't either. I tried too, but it didn't work. And also, like Terrie, I started as an artist. I had a studio major at Smith, and I ended up throwing my easel at Leonard Baskin because I hated his art. And I said, this is awful.
That sounds defiant.
I didn't think of it that way. I thought of it as a survival. There's no way I was going to do these, these kitsch birds. No. And he said, too bad you are an expressionist. And I lost a whole year's credit because it was a double major. And I just thought, I can't do this. I'm sure Terrie had talent because there are other people in her family who have talent, not mentioning any names. But somehow or another, you realize that this is not you. This is not the desperate thing that you must do. And so you do, and Alice and I have a long career as teachers. Both of us have taught, and in fact, we both taught at Yale. But I always said to my students on the first day, can anybody here do something else? And everybody who raised their hand, I said, go do the other thing. No, and I honestly believe that. You have to do the thing.
We can't say that anymore because we have.
Well, I do say that. And I just do the other thing. It's very hard to be an artist.
Okay. Well, when we were speaking just before the panel started, it was interesting to hear who some of your students have been. So in your case, Barbara, Martin Puryear and Lois Lane, and in Alice's case, Matthew Barney and Leo Villarreal. And then in your case, would you say that Diego Rivera was sort of a teacher? Or Diego Rivera?
You know, I didn't really have, I didn't really have art teachers. No, I didn't. I learned a lot from other artists. Intellectually, I think the most important place was the New School. And it was all German immigrants who came to the United States and needed jobs and were teaching at the New School. I think you mentioned they were teaching at Columbia.
They were at Columbia, the New School, and the Institute.
Yeah, well, they were very important to me. I studied anthropology and literature and art history and philosophy. With them, they were hard to understand, I have to say, because they all had very thick accents. Oh God, I still have trouble. But it was so insightful and so different from anything that I had experienced before. I did share with Alice, a father who was extremely interested in getting his daughter to read books, and I had a very supportive family in that sense. That but I didn't really have art teachers. I didn't really have art teachers. I was self-taught.
Okay, so we're in a moment, we're going to open it up to questions, but I just want to ask Alice about teaching, because it's something that you did at Yale. You were head of the department, or the head of the graduate sculpture center, yes. And you've been at the, is it SVA? Since 1991. And teaching is a really big part, I would assume, of your practice and the way that you frame the world. So, and you also mentioned some preoccupation lately with what's going on in the world.
Oh, yes. Well, I think it's like being a doctor. You graduate from medical school and you know exactly what's going on, and then if you don't keep up, do you want to go to that doctor anymore? So I think what's been wonderful about teaching, first and foremost, it was a way for me to pay the bills. It was one of the first things that women could teach in college and therefore get decent salaries and support their art career, while they were also it fed your art career. You were with other colleagues, other artists. When I started doing it, artists couldn't make a lot of money off their art, so they had to teach. And I had some great teachers, I have to say. Leo Steinberg, Robert Morris, Toni Smith. And at that time, then women started teaching, and so it was a way to survive. It's also a way to keep to really stay up on things and to stay really talking about outside your own brain, your own preoccupations and obsessions. You're there trying to deal with the other, trying to understand other ways of making things besides the way you make things. And it often happens for me that I will say something to a student and then I will say, why didn't I ask myself that question? Why didn't I do that? And so, and I also feel very strongly it's a way to give back. It's a way to mentor young women who you can give them a sense of safety and security within their studios that they don't even know that because they take you for granted now. But it's a way of carrying it forward. So I believe really strongly in education, deeply in education, as a way of getting out of the culture that is imprisoning you, wherever that may be, whatever culture that is. I'm also feeling at the moment, as I think many of us are, that a lot of the values and the way we felt about the world as young people. I went to school during the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the beginnings of the environmental movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, all of these things that I believed we were there at the inception of this marvelous new time. And now it is under assault, and it concerns me deeply. And sometimes it's hard for me just to think only about my own practice, and I feel compelled to try to at least understand, if not obstruct, something that the values that I believe very deeply in. And so, yes.
So at this point, unless anyone has anything they want to add, I'm going to open it up to questions. I've told Terrie you have to have a question. Put you on the spot. Okay, there's one over here. You have time to think about it. Ron.
So I just, number one, like to thank everybody for being here. It is an amazing
I'll repeat the question after.
question for each one of you. If you were giving advice to a young woman, artist, or one that wanted to be in the art field, whether it's as a museum director or an art critic or an artist, what would that advice be, and how would it be different than what you would give if it was to a young male artist? Would it be different?
Okay, so first of all, he said we were all brilliant. and then the question is, if you were to give advice to a young female artist, what would that advice be, and how would that advice be different from what you would offer to a young male artist? And I think we'll just give one or two people the chance to answer this.
I would like to answer that. My advice to anybody, any young person that comes to me, as an intern or, for advice, I get actually called a lot. And my advice is the same, whether you're a man or a woman, and that is find a mentor. Find a mentor that you can rely on, that you can call on at various stages throughout your career so that you can test your own achievements, your own challenges, and your own decision making against somebody who you actually trust and admire. To me, I think that that's probably the strongest advice I could ever give to anyone.
Michelle concurs.
Totally agree. I think that's great advice. The other one is not to get married.
Oh, I disagree with that one.
Having done that several times, and we said we weren't going to go there, I would just say have really good divorces and stay friends with all of them, and think of it as a business relationship. The third or fourth time around, do you want to be in business with this person? So, but at any rate.
Best answer ever. Okay, other questions? Yes, right here. So the question is, where do children come into the picture?
I think that the decision that a woman makes either to have children or not have children is much more important than getting married or not getting married. I have friends who decided that I have a friend who deeply regretted not having children, And so my daughter, who lives in Paris, is now really her daughter, and she likes my friend much better than she likes me. And they're very happy together. But if you're a responsible person, but not all women are that responsible. I mean, I know older women, and this would be very surprising to everybody, and so I'm not mentioning any names, who abandoned their children. I know two very famous artists, no longer with us, one a painter, one a sculptor, who had a child that they abandoned. But whatever it is, it's a struggle. I mean, you don't have them, you have them. It's just something that is a psychological and physical struggle, I think, for women that men don't have.
I did choose late in life to have a child, and I felt that I wanted everything the guys had, including children. And I wasn't going to sort of sacrifice that because I just wasn't. But I did it at a point in life when I knew that I didn't have to make the choice between the child and the career, and that I could take care of my son. And that I was self-reliant, and I could take care of my career at the same time. And so I made that choice in a very determined way. I can say that it is the great love of my life. It is probably like no other love, and I will never regret it. And that he was tougher than any project that I ever had, and that it really is like a great love affair. But pushing it forward and putting someone into the world that hopefully will go farther and dream farther than you can, which is what I think human beings need to do. How can I move this further? Human knowledge, human thought. That I had to do that, and I had to try. And so I think the other thing that has happened, each generation of women makes it better for the ones that come. You know, I had it so much better than the generation in back of me, and I know that the young women coming after me are able to do things just quite naturally. They are able to have decent marriages and have children, and no one says to them, oh, you're just a mother. No, they take it for granted that they can do exactly what men did, which is have families and still have great careers. So I think each generation makes it better for the ones that came before. But for me, it was not a sacrifice that I wanted to make. And so, yeah.
Thank you. I caught something along the way. Yes.
This has been a very fine panel. Thank you. Women have moved in, what shall we say, quarter inches toward equity over the years. How close are we to equity now?
Okay. So the comment was women have moved in quarter inches towards equity over a number of years. And how close are we to equity? Who I think maybe Barbara Rose wants to take this.
No, I just think you just forget it. Not in this country. This is a frontier macho society, and you can have a woman president in every European country. And I don't know whether the problem was Hillary Clinton or Hillary Clinton as a woman or whatever it was, but I think the United States, look at the directors of museums, at the directors of the top museums in this country. Which one is a woman? You? Okay, but you're not a commit.
No.
And you should be.
But, oh God, no. I wouldn't want that job for anything. I sort of agree, and I sort of don't agree. I don't think that we can say that we've gotten nowhere, because we have gotten somewhere. It is kind of unbelievable that we're not getting anywhere as fast as our European colleagues. But just in the museum profession, for example, it is true that, the big top tier of the museums are not run by women, although we did have Anne de Harnecourt at the Philadelphia Museum and she was incredible. So it can happen. But it is interesting that many of us that started as curators are working our way up through the ranks and taking important positions at mid-size and mid-size plus art museums. I mean, Andrea's at Guildhall. I'm at the Parish. We have women colleagues running the Carnegie Museum, the Hammer Museum, the Dia, Brooklyn Museum, the Walker Art Center. So it's coming, and the new museum, and so we're all younger than those guys that are running the big museums too. So here again, you have the act of defiance, which just is a very simple, just keep showing up every day for work, and eventually they're going to go, and somebody is going to be ready to take their place.
I think I am extremely grateful for this opportunity. Thank you all for being here today. Toni has a few words to say, but I just want to mention that your assigned reading is the natural superiority of women. So go find that on Abe Books. Thank you so much for having us, Toni. Thank you, everyone on the panel, for your brilliance.
I don't know how I got this lucky. I don't know how we all got this lucky. This was so extraordinary. I feel like crying. Thank you. Thank you so much. And what you said about mentors, I don't know if you noticed, but the program is dedicated to Elaine de Kooning, who was a really instrumental mentor to me and was the one who really brought me out here, moved me out here, found me a studio, left me notes in my studio, let me draw alongside her, took me to life drawing with her and Mercedes and Connie Fox, and it made a huge difference in my life. And I never thought at the time about the fact that she was a woman. It was simply that she deeply cared about me. I see now that also her being a woman was really profound for me. So anyway, I thank everybody for being here. Diane has one more thing she'd like to say, and we do have another panel coming up on September 23rd. That list is in formation right now, but we do have Almond Zygmunt, Bastian Schmidt, and Pernilla Holmes, and we'll be adding one or two others, so keep following us. And is that it? Thank you.